Hello everyone and welcome back to Shadow Man Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Thomas Ravencrest, and I've been protecting these mountains for over 21 years. Folks around here call me Ranger Tom, and I've pulled more than 200 people off these cliffs, some alive, some not. I know every crack in these limestone walls, every cave mouth, every spot where the wind howls just a little different than it should. Seneca Rocks stands 900 feet tall in the heart of West Virginia's Monongahela National Forest. It's a wall of white limestone that cuts into the sky like God's own tombstone. Most people see it and think it's beautiful. I see it and count the ways it can kill you. Before I became a ranger, I worked the coal mines with my brother Danny. That was back when I thought the only danger came from cave-ins and bad air. Danny died in a collapse when I was 25, crushed under 1,000,000 tons of rock while I was eating lunch topside. After that, I couldn't go back underground. So I came up here instead, where the rock faces outward and you can see the sky. The old-timers around here used to tell stories about these mountains. They'd say the Cherokee knew things about Seneca Rocks that we'd forgotten. Something about spirits living inside the stone itself, the Nunahi, they called them. Immortal people who took the worthy ones to live forever in caves that went deeper than anyone could measure. I never believed any of that. Rock is rock, cold is cold, dead is dead. That was before October 28th, 1973, when 3 experienced climbers vanished without a trace, and I learned that some things you believe in, whether you want to or not. The morning started normal enough. I was drinking coffee in the ranger station when the call came in. 3 climbers, all experienced, all with proper gear, had missed their check-in time. Their names were Sarah Chen, Mike Rodriguez, and Dave Thompson. Sarah was a geology professor from Virginia Tech. Mike guided climbs in Colorado during the summers. Dave had been up and down Seneca Rocks more times than I could count. These weren't weekend warriors who bit off more than they could chew. I grabbed my gear and hiked out to the North Peak approach. The first thing I noticed was the silence. No birds, no insects. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. In 21 years of working these mountains, I'd never heard them this quiet. Their camp was still set up perfect, tents staked down tight, gear organized neat as a pin. But their climbing equipment was gone, which meant they'd headed up the wall like planned. I pulled out my binoculars and started scanning the rock face. What I found made my blood run cold. Their ropes were hanging about 300 feet up the cliff, swaying gentle in the breeze. But they weren't just hanging loose. They were tied off to anchor points that shouldn't exist. I knew every bolt, every piton, every natural anchor on that wall. These ropes were attached to spots where there was nothing but smooth limestone. I called my partner Jake Morrison on the radio. Jake's been a ranger for 8 years, and he's the best technical climber I've ever worked with. His voice crackled through the static. "Tom, you sure about those anchor points? Maybe they placed some new gear we can't see from down there." "Jake, I'm telling you, there's nothing there. These ropes are hanging from empty air." "Well, they didn't tie themselves off to nothing. I'm heading your way." While I waited for Jake, I walked the base of the cliff looking for any sign of where our missing climbers might have gone. The temperature kept dropping as I moved closer to certain cave mouths. Not the normal October chill. This was the kind of cold that comes from deep underground, the kind that makes your bones ache. That's when I found the footprints. Fresh boot prints in the soft dirt, leading straight into a cave opening that I knew for certain had been sealed with a steel grate just last month. The grate was still there, still locked, but the prints went right through it like it was made of smoke. I knelt down and touched one of the prints. The dirt was warm. Jake arrived an hour later with Samuel Featherstone, the Cherokee guide who helped us out sometimes when hikers got lost in the backcountry. Samuel was 67 years old and knew these mountains better than anyone alive. He took one look at the cave mouth and went pale. "This place should not be open," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "My grandfather told me stories about this cave. Said it was sealed for good reason." "What kind of stories?" I asked. Samuel was quiet for a long moment, studying the impossible footprints. The old ones said, "Some caves are doors." Most doors, you can choose to open or not open. But some doors, they choose when to open themselves. Jake was already gearing up to rappel down from the top of the cliff to check those mysterious anchor points. "Save the ghost stories for later," he said. "We've got 3 people missing and about 6 hours of daylight left." I wanted to argue, but Jake was right. Whatever was happening here, our first job was finding Sarah, Mike, and Dave. Everything else could wait. Jake climbed to the top of Seneca Rocks and set up his rappel. I stayed at the bottom with my radio, watching through binoculars as he descended toward those impossible anchor points. At first, everything looked normal. Jake moved down the cliff face with the easy confidence of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Then he reached the ropes. "Tom!" Jake's voice came through the radio, tight with confusion. "These ropes they're embedded in the rock. Not tied off to anything. They're growing out of the stone like roots." "That's impossible. I'm looking right at it. The rope fibers are fused with the limestone. It's like the rock grew around them." I felt something cold crawl up my spine. "Can you see any sign of the climbers?" "Negative." "But Tom, there's something else up here." "Handprints." "What kind of handprints?" "Human. Fresh. But they're not on the rock. They're in the rock. Like someone pressed their hands into the stone while it was soft clay." Samuel grabbed my arm. His fingers were shaking. "Tell him to come down, right now." "Why?" "Because those handprints, they don't belong to the living." I keyed the radio. "Jake, start heading down. Give me a few more minutes. I want to check." The radio cut to static. Then, through the white noise, I heard something that made my stomach drop. Voices. Whispering voices, speaking words I didn't recognize. The voices were coming from inside the static, like they were trapped in the radio waves themselves. "Jake, do you copy?" The whispers got louder, more urgent, and underneath them, I heard Jake's voice, faint and distorted. "Tom, oh God, they're in the rock. They're moving through, but the rock, like water." Then silence. I looked up at the cliff face through my binoculars. Jake was gone. His rope hung empty against the limestone, swaying in a wind I couldn't feel. Samuel was backing away from the cave mouth. "We need to leave. Now. I'm not leaving without my partner." "Your partner is beyond your help." "What the hell does that mean?" Samuel pointed at the cave opening. "Look." The steel grate was glowing. Not reflecting sunlight, actually glowing with a soft blue-white light that seemed to come from deep inside the mountain. And as I watched, new handprints appeared in the rock around the cave mouth. Fresh prints, pressing outward from inside the stone like someone was trying to push their way through from the other side. One of the prints was too small to be a man's hand. It looked like it belonged to a woman about Sarah Chen's size. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees in the span of a heartbeat. My breath came out in white puffs, and frost began forming on the metal parts of my gear. The silence that had bothered me all morning grew deeper, more oppressive. It felt like the whole mountain was holding its breath. That's when I heard the singing. It came from inside the cave, echoing up from depths that shouldn't exist. The melody was beautiful and sad, like a lullaby sung in a language that predated human speech. The voice was female, young, and achingly familiar. It sounded like Sarah Chen. I took a step toward the cave mouth before Samuel caught my arm. "That's not her," he said. "That's how they call to you. They use the voices of the ones they've taken." "Who's they?" "The Nunehi, the immortal people. They've been sleeping in these mountains since before Columbus, since before my people first walked these ridges. Sometimes they wake up. Sometimes they get lonely." The singing stopped. In the sudden silence, I heard footsteps coming from inside the cave. Slow, deliberate footsteps walking up from impossible depths. Samuel was already halfway back to the trail. "If we stay here, we'll join them." "Is that what you want?" I looked up at the cliff face one more time. Jake's rope was gone now, like it had never existed at all. But I could see new handprints appearing in the rock, marching up the wall like someone was climbing the inside of the mountain. Something was coming. Something old and patient and hungry. And it knew we were here. We retreated to the ranger station, but I couldn't get the image of those handprints out of my head. Jake Morrison was gone. A man I'd worked with for 8 years, who knew these cliffs better than his own backyard. plus 3 experienced climbers who'd vanished without a trace. 5 people don't just disappear into solid rock. Samuel helped me go through the old Cherokee records that the Forest Service kept in the archives. Most of it was standard stuff: hunting grounds, tribal boundaries, burial sites. But buried in a file from 1923, we found something that made my hands shake. A report from a Cherokee elder named Joseph Crow Feather, Samuel's grandfather. He'd told the park officials about the Nunehai, immortal spirits who lived in the deep caves and took people to preserve them from the corruption of the surface world. According to the report, the Nunehai appeared as tall, pale figures with silver eyes who could walk through solid rock like it was air. The report recommended sealing certain cave openings with iron grates because iron was one of the few things that could slow them down. Not stop them, just slow them down. "Your grandfather helped seal that cave," I said to Samuel. He nodded. He said the Nunehai were getting restless, taking too many people. The seals were meant to give them time to go back to sleep. How long do they usually sleep? 50 years, sometimes longer. I did the math. If they'd been sealed in 1923, 50 years would put their next awakening right around now. That's when my radio crackled to life. It was dispatch calling all available rangers to the north side of Seneca Rocks. A family of hikers had reported seeing people walking through the cliff face like ghosts. Samuel and I drove out there as fast as the Park Service truck could handle the mountain roads. We found the hiker family, the Johnsons from Pittsburgh, standing in their campsite white as sheets. The father, Bob Johnson, kept pointing at the rock wall and stammering. "They came right through the stone," he said. 3 people in climbing gear. But their skin was gray and their eyes were wrong. They looked right at us, then walked back into the rock like it wasn't even there. His wife Karen was crying. They looked so sad, like they wanted to tell us something but couldn't remember how to talk. Their 10-year-old daughter tugged on my sleeve. "Mister." One of them was a lady. She had a name tag that said Sarah. My blood turned to ice water. Sarah Chen had been wearing a name tag from the Virginia Tech Geology Department. The Johnsons packed up and left within the hour. I didn't blame them. But as they drove away, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Fresh handprints were appearing all along the base of the cliff, dozens of them, like a crowd of invisible people was pressing against the rock from the inside, and the temperature was dropping fast. Too fast for October in West Virginia. My breath was coming out in white clouds, even though it was only mid-afternoon. "They're getting stronger," Samuel said. "The longer they're awake, the more they can manifest in our world." "What do they want?" "To preserve the worthy ones. They take people they think are special, skilled, intelligent, pure of heart. They bring them into the eternal caves where time moves differently, where death can't touch them." "That doesn't sound so bad." Samuel grabbed my arm. "You don't understand. Time doesn't just move differently in their realm, it barely moves at all. One day down there is like a year up here. They think they're saving people, but they're really trapping them in a kind of living death." A new voice came through my radio. Weak, distorted, but unmistakably familiar. It was Jake. "Tom, can you hear me? I'm inside the mountain. It's beautiful here, Tom. They showed me things, cities made of crystal, rivers that flow upward. But I can't find my way out. The passages keep changing. And the others, Sarah and Mike and Dave, they're here too. But they're different now. They've been here so long they're starting to forget the surface world." "Jake, where are you? How do I find you?" "Don't come looking, Tom. Please. They want you to come. They've been watching you for years. They say you're special, that you understand the mountains like they do. But if you come down here, you'll never leave. None of us will." The radio went dead. Samuel was staring at the cliff face with growing horror. The handprints were multiplying faster now, and I could see shapes moving through the stone, tall, elongated figures with 2 long arms and silver eyes that reflected light like mirrors. "They're coming," Samuel whispered. "All of them." That's when the cave mouth started glowing brighter. The blue-white light was pouring out of the opening like water, and I could hear voices echoing from deep underground. Not the whispers from the radio, actual voices, speaking in harmony, calling out in that ancient language that sounded like wind through stone, and walking up from the depths, I could see them. The Nunehai. They were 7 feet tall and pale as moonlight. Their skin seemed to glow from within, and their eyes were solid silver with no pupils at all. They moved like they were underwater, slow and graceful, their feet not quite touching the ground. The one in the lead raised its hand, and when it spoke, its voice echoed inside my skull. "Keeper of the stone paths," it said, though its lips didn't move. "You have protected our mountain for many years. You understand its moods, its dangers, its sacred places. Come with us. Let us preserve you from the decay of the surface world." I wanted to run. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get as far away from these things as possible. But Jake was down there somewhere. Sarah, Mike, and Dave too. I couldn't just leave them. "Give me back my people," I said. The Nanahi tilted its head. "They are safe. They are eternal. They have become like us, beyond the reach of time and death and sorrow. They're prisoners. They are preserved. As you will be, if you choose wisdom over stubbornness." More Nanahi were emerging from the cave now. Dozens of them, gliding across the ground like ghosts. And behind them, I could see other figures. Human figures in modern clothing, but their skin had the same pale glow as their captors. One of them was Sarah Chen. She looked exactly the same as when she disappeared 3 days ago, except for her eyes. They were silver now, just like the Nanahi, and when she looked at me, there was no recognition there, no memory of the surface world at all. "Join us, willingly," the lead Nanahi said, "and we will be gentle. Resist, and we will take you anyway, but the transition will be unpleasant." I looked at Samuel. He was backing toward the truck, his face gray with terror. "Run," he whispered. "Run, and don't look back." But I couldn't run, not with Jake down there, not with 4 people depending on me to find a way to bring them home. I pulled out my climbing gear and started gearing up for a descent into hell. Samuel tried to stop me, but I was already clipping into my harness. "There has to be a way," I said. "Your grandfather's report mentioned iron slowing them down. Maybe there's something else, some way to break their hold." "You don't understand," Samuel said, his voice shaking. "My grandfather didn't seal them away to protect us from them. He sealed them away to protect them from what they might do if they got too hungry. They're not evil, Tom. They're trying to save people. But their idea of salvation is our idea of damnation." The Nanahi were getting closer, gliding across the ground with that underwater grace. The temperature had dropped so far that ice was forming on the rocks around the cave mouth. My breath came out in thick white clouds. "There might be one way," Samuel said suddenly. "The old stories say the Nanahi must honor the ancient protocols. If you approach them with the proper respect, if you offer a trade they find acceptable, they might listen." "What kind of trade?" "A life for a life. One willing soul in exchange for the ones they've taken." I looked at the approaching figures, the pale, elongated Nanahi and the human, shapes walking behind them like sleepwalkers. Sarah Chen was there, and I could see Mike Rodriguez and Dave Thompson too. All of them had that same silver-eyed, empty stare. "Tom," Jake's voice crackled through my radio again. "I can see you. Don't come down here, please. They're in my head now. I can feel them changing me. In a few more hours, I won't remember why I wanted to leave." That decided it. I clipped my headlamp to my helmet and started toward the cave mouth. The lead Nanahi raised its hand, and I felt a pressure in my skull like someone was trying to push their way into my thoughts. But instead of fighting it, I did what Samuel had suggested. I stopped walking and bowed my head in the traditional Cherokee gesture of respect. "Ancient ones," I said, trying to remember the phrases Samuel had taught me. "Keepers of the eternal caves, I come seeking an exchange." The pressure in my head lessened. The Nanahi tilted its head, curious. "You know the old ways," it said, its voice echoing inside my skull. "That is interesting. It has been many years since a surface dweller showed proper respect. I offer myself in trade for the 4 you have taken. One willing soul for 4 who were taken against their will." The Nanahi considered this. Around us, the temperature kept dropping. Ice was forming on my gear now, and I could see my breath in thick white puffs. "The 4 you seek have already begun the transformation," the Nanahi said. "Soon they will be like us, eternal, preserved, beyond the reach of surface corruption." "Why would you trade eternal life for a few decades of decay and death?" "Because that's what it means to be human. We're supposed to grow old. We're supposed to die. That's what makes life precious. The Nunehai was silent for a long moment. When it spoke again, its voice was sad. We have preserved thousands over the centuries. Poets, artists, healers, warriors, all the beautiful ones, all the worthy ones. We have saved them from war and disease and the slow rot of age, and still the surface world mourns them as if preservation were loss. Because it is loss. You're not saving them, you're stealing them. Taking them away from everyone who loves them. Love, the Nunehai said, and I could hear something like pain in its mental voice. We remember love. We remember what it was to feel the warmth of sunlight, the change of seasons, the brief joy of mortal connection. We gave up all of that to become eternal, and now we preserve others so they will not have to make that choice. I started to understand. The Nunehai weren't monsters, they were tragic. Ancient people who had chosen immortality and spent centuries regretting it, trying to save others from the pain of mortality by trapping them in the same timeless prison. Then let them choose, I said. Bring them back to consciousness and let them decide for themselves. If they want to stay with you, I won't interfere. But if they want to return to the surface world, you have to let them go. The Nunehai considered this. I could feel its thoughts brushing against mine. Ancient, weary, filled with the loneliness of thousands of years. Very well, it said finally. But if they choose to leave, you must take their place. The balance must be maintained. We cannot let all the preserved ones go without gaining another to take their place. And if they choose to stay, then you may return to your surface world. But you will carry the knowledge of what lies beneath. You will know that we are here, waiting whenever the worthy ones need preservation. I agreed to the terms. What choice did I have? The Nunehai gestured to the human figures behind it. Sarah Chen stepped forward first, and I watched the silver fade from her eyes as consciousness returned to them. She blinked, looked around, and immediately started shivering in the unnatural cold. Where am I? She asked. How long have I been gone? 3 days, I said. You're in the caves under Seneca Rocks. Do you remember what happened? Sarah's memories came back slowly. I could see the horror and wonder warring in her face as she remembered the crystal cities, the upward-flowing rivers, the timeless halls where the Nunehai dwelt. It was beautiful, she whispered, but it wasn't real. Not really. It was like living in a dream where you can never wake up. One by one, the others came back to consciousness. Mike Rodriguez wept when he realized how much time had passed. Dave Thompson just stood there, shaking his head, unable to process what he'd experienced. And Jake looked at me with eyes full of gratitude and terror. Tom, he said, they showed me things down there, things that made me want to stay forever. If you hadn't come for us. The choice is yours, the lead Nunehai said. Return to your brief surface lives, knowing that time will steal everything you love, or remain with us in the eternal halls, preserved forever from loss and pain. All 4 of them looked at the cave mouth, at the blue-white light that promised escape from every human fear and sorrow. For a moment, I thought they might actually choose to stay. Then Sarah shook her head. I want to go home. I want to see my family, even if it means growing old, even if it means dying someday. The others nodded agreement. One by one, they chose mortality over preservation. The Nunehai turned to me. The trade is acceptable. Come with us, keeper of the stone paths. Let us show you wonders beyond imagination. I looked at my friends, at the 4 people I'd managed to save. Then I looked at the cave mouth and the eternal darkness beyond. And I made my choice. I walked into that cave mouth expecting never to see the surface world again. The blue-white light surrounded me like warm water, and I felt the Nunehai's thoughts brushing against mine, showing me glimpses of the crystal cities that waited in the depths. But something strange happened as we descended into the mountain. The deeper we went, the more I could feel the weight of the stone above us. And that weight felt familiar. Like the coal mines where my brother Danny had died all those years ago. You were a miner, the lead Nunehai said, reading my thoughts. You understand the weight of stone, the pressure of depths, the darkness that lives in the heart of the earth. Yes, I said, and I know something else. I know that even the deepest mine has a way out. The Nunehai stopped walking. Around us, The crystal walls pulsed with that eerie blue light. "You are not like the others," it said. "Most who come here are overwhelmed by the beauty, the promise of eternal life. But you see the prison within the paradise. Because I've been in prisons before. Underground places where men go to work and sometimes never come back up. My brother died in a place like this. And yet you became a keeper of mountain paths. You chose to stay close to the stone that killed your brother. Because someone has to. Someone has to know the dangers, to guide people safely through them. That's what being a ranger means." The Nunahai was quiet for a long moment. When it spoke again, its voice was different. Sadder. More human. "We have been poor guardians," it said. "We thought preservation was protection, but we see now that we have become the very thing we sought to protect people from. We have become the danger in the depths." "Not danger," I said, "just misguided. You want to help people, that's not wrong. But maybe there's a better way. What do you propose?" "Let me be your liaison. I'll stay on the surface, keep doing my job as a ranger. But when you encounter people in the mountains, people who are lost, hurt, in real danger, you let me know. I'll help them the human way. And if someone genuinely wants to join you, if they make that choice freely and with full knowledge of what it means, then that's between you and them." The Nunahai considered this. I could feel its thoughts, heavy with the weight of centuries, weighing my proposal against millennia of loneliness and misguided preservation. "You would do this? Serve as a bridge between our worlds?" "It's what I'm already doing, keeping people safe in the mountains. This would just expand my territory a little." The Nunahai laughed, actually laughed, a sound like wind chimes made of ice. "Very well, keeper of stone paths, we accept your terms. But know this, the knowledge you carry now will change you. You will see the mountains differently, feel their weight differently. And sometimes, in the deep caves where echoes live forever, you will hear us calling." I nodded. I can live with that. The journey back to the surface took no time at all. One moment I was standing in the crystal halls deep beneath Seneca rocks, and the next I was walking out of the cave mouth into the gray October morning. Samuel was waiting for me, along with Jake and the 3 climbers. "How long was I gone?" I asked. Samuel checked his watch. "About 10 minutes. But when I looked at the cave mouth, the steel grate was back in place, locked tight. And when I reached out to touch it, my hand passed right through the metal like it was made of mist. Some doors, once opened, never really close again. That was 47 years ago. I'm retired now, living in a little cabin at the base of Seneca Rocks. But I still patrol these mountains, still guide lost hikers back to safety. And sometimes, when the mist is thick and the temperature drops without warning, I hear voices echoing from the deep caves. The Nunahai kept their word. Over the years, they've sent me dreams, visions of people in danger in the backcountry. I've saved dozens of lives that way, reaching lost hikers just in time, finding injured climbers, before hypothermia could claim them. And once, just once, someone chose to go with them. A young man dying of cancer, facing months of pain with no hope of recovery. He came to the mountains seeking peace, and the Nunahai offered him a different kind of peace. I explained what it would mean. The eternal preservation, the timeless halls, the slow forgetting of the surface world. He chose it freely, with full knowledge. I still don't know if that was right or wrong, but it was his choice to make. Jake, Sarah, Mike, and Dave all recovered fully from their experience. They went back to their lives, their families, their normal human concerns. But sometimes they write to me, and I can see in their letters that they remember. They remember the crystal cities and the upward-flowing rivers, and sometimes they wonder what might have been. The mountains keep their secrets well. But if you know how to listen, if you understand the weight of stone and the darkness that lives in deep places, you can hear them whispering. The hollow men of Seneca Rocks, calling out from their timeless halls, still trying to save us from the beautiful, terrible gift of mortality. And I'm still here, keeping watch. Because someone has to stand guard at the boundary between worlds. Someone has to make sure the doors stay closed, until someone truly worthy chooses to open them. The mountains are patient. They can wait. My name is Rebecca Thornbrook, and I've been a park ranger for 11 years. I work in the George Washington National Forest in Virginia, up in the Shenandoah Mountains. Most folks think my job is just hiking around pretty trails and telling people not to feed the bears. But the truth is, I spend most of my time working with kids. I love children, always have. Before I became a ranger, I was a teacher for 8 years. When I switched careers, I made sure to get certified in youth education programs. I've led over 200 school groups through these mountains. I know how to keep 23rd graders in line on a nature walk, how to spot the signs when a kid is getting too tired or scared, and how to make even the most reluctant teenager excited about spotting a red-tailed hawk. Kids have big imaginations. They see faces in tree bark and hear monsters in the wind. They ask me if Bigfoot lives in these woods, if there are real witches hiding in the caves. I always smile and tell them the forest is full of real magic, the kind you can see in a butterfly landing on your nose or hear in an owl calling at dusk. I never believed in ghost stories. Not once in 11 years. That changed in November of 1979. It was one of those gray November days that makes you want to crawl back under your blankets. The temperature had dropped to 25 degrees the night before, and heavy clouds hung low over the mountains like a dirty wool blanket. I was leading a group of 22 fifth graders from Harrisonburg Elementary on what should have been a simple day hike to Dark Hollow. Dark Hollow sits about 15 miles from Skyline Drive, deep in a mountain valley that you can only reach on foot. It's one of my favorite spots to take kids because there's real history there. Back in the 1842, it was a small settlement, dollars-us, maybe 30 families trying to make a living from the hard mountain soil. But in 1847, diphtheria swept through the community. 23 children died that winter. By spring, the survivors had packed up and left. All that remains now are some stone foundations and an old cemetery with headstones so worn you can barely read the names. The kids always love hearing about the old settlement. They like to imagine what life was like before electricity and cars. They explore the stone ruins and try to guess where the kitchen was, where the kids slept. It's living history, and it makes the past feel real to them. That morning, everything started normal. The kids were excited, chattering about whether we'd see deer or maybe even a black bear. I did my usual safety speech. In quartet, stay with your buddy, don't wander off the trail, raise your hand if you need to stop. My partner, David Millstone, was with me. He's been a ranger for 16 years and has 3 kids of his own. The children trust him immediately because he has that easy way with kids that comes from being a father. We hiked the 3 miles to Dark Hollow without any problems. The kids were fascinated by the ruins, just like always. They found the old cemetery and spent time trying to read the faded names on the headstones. Everything was going perfectly. Then little Sarah Mitchell came running up to me, her cheeks red from the cold. "Miss Rebecca," she said, grabbing my arm. "There are kids playing by the old houses." I looked where she was pointing. I didn't see anyone. "What kids, honey?" "The ones in the funny clothes. They were playing Ring Around the Rosie, but when I tried to join them, they ran away." David and I exchanged a look. We were 15 miles from the nearest road. No other groups were scheduled for the area that day. "Sarah, are you sure you saw other children?" She nodded firmly. They had on long dresses and funny hats, like from the olden days. Some of the other kids had gathered around us now. A boy named Tommy piped up. "I saw them too." There was a little girl with blonde braids. She waved at me. "They were singing," added Maria Santos. But I couldn't understand the words. I felt the first tiny prickle of unease, like a cold finger touching the back of my neck. But I pushed it away. Kids feed off each other's imagination. One sees something, and suddenly they all see it. "Okay, everyone," I called out. "Let's gather up for our nature lesson." But as I counted heads, my stomach dropped. We had 22 kids when we started. Now I only counted 21. "David," I said quietly, trying to keep the worry out of my voice. "Count again." He did a quick head count and his face went pale. 21. "Who's missing?" I asked, though my hands were already shaking as I pulled out my attendance list. We went through the names together. Michael Chen, the quiet kid who always hung back from the group, who loved looking at rocks and collecting interesting leaves. He'd been right beside Tommy just 10 minutes ago. "Michael," I called out. "Michael." "Chen." My voice echoed off the stone ruins and came back empty. The other kids started looking around nervously. Maybe he went to the bathroom, suggested one girl. Michael wouldn't wander off, said his buddy Kevin. He's scared of getting lost. David was already moving, checking behind the larger foundation stones. I started organizing the other kids. Everyone sit down right here on this fallen log, I said, pointing to a spot in the center of the clearing. Nobody moves until we find Michael. Kevin, you're the buddy leader. Count to 21 every 2 minutes and tell me if anyone else is missing. The temperature seemed to drop another 10 degrees while we searched. I could see my breath now, which was strange because it had been much warmer when we'd started the hike. Rebecca. David's voice came from near the cemetery. Over here. I ran to where he was standing by a cluster of small headstones. In the soft earth, I could see footprints. Michael's sneakers. I recognized the waffle pattern from his Nike shoes. But next to his prints were other marks. Smaller feet, bare feet, children's bare feet in 25-degree weather. Could be from another group yesterday, David said. But he didn't sound convinced. I knelt down to look closer. The bare footprints were tiny, maybe a size children's 10 or 11, and they were fresh. The earth around them was still soft, unfrozen. David, no child would be barefoot in this weather. They'd get frostbite in minutes. That's when we heard it. Faint laughter coming from deeper in the woods. Children's laughter, high and musical. Michael, I shouted. Michael, come back here right now. The laughter stopped. Then we heard Michael's voice, distant but clear. I'm playing. They want me to play with them. David and I crashed through the underbrush toward his voice. Branches grabbed at our clothes and thorns scratched our faces. The laughter started up again, but it seemed to be moving away from us, deeper into the forest. Michael, you need to come back. Now, I yelled. This is not safe. But his voice was getting fainter. They know all the best games, old games I never heard of. We ran harder, following the sound of voices. But every time we thought we were getting close, the sounds would move again. It was like chasing an echo. After 20 minutes of crashing through the woods, we stumbled into another small clearing. And there was Michael, sitting on a fallen log, laughing and clapping his hands. He was alone. Michael! I rushed to him and grabbed his shoulders. Where are the other children? He looked up at me with bright, happy eyes. What other children, Miss Rebecca? The ones you were playing with. The ones who were laughing. I wasn't playing with anyone. I was just sitting here looking at this cool rock. He held up an ordinary gray stone. David and I stared at each other. We had both heard multiple voices. Children laughing and talking. But Michael was completely alone, and he seemed genuinely confused about what we were talking about. Michael, why did you leave the group? I asked. I don't remember leaving, he said slowly. I was looking at the cemetery, and then I was here. I found this neat rock. I checked him over carefully. He seemed fine, not cold, not scared, not hurt. But something felt wrong. Michael was always a careful, rule-following kid. He would never wander off alone, especially not this far into the woods. How long have you been sitting here? David asked. Michael thought about it. I don't know, maybe a few minutes? But we'd been searching for almost half an hour. As we walked back toward the group, I noticed something else that made my skin crawl. The woods around us were completely silent. No bird calls, no squirrel chatter, no wind in the leaves. Just our footsteps crunching on the frost-covered ground. And the temperature, I kept dropping. By the time we got back to the ruins, I could see ice crystals forming on the kids' breath. Some of them were starting to shiver. Okay, everyone, we're heading back, I announced. Time to warm up. As we gathered our things, I did another head count. 22 kids. Everyone was there. But as we started down the trail, Sarah Mitchell grabbed my sleeve again. Miss Rebecca, she whispered, the kids in the old-fashioned clothes are following us. I looked back at the ruins. For just a second, I thought I saw movement among the stone foundations. Something pale and small, darting between the rocks like children playing hide-and-seek. But when I blinked, there was nothing there except shadows and fallen leaves. The hike back was the longest 3 miles of my life. The kids kept looking over their shoulders and whispering to each other. Every few minutes, someone would point into the woods and say they saw something moving. The temperature never warmed up. Even though we were walking downhill, and should have been getting warmer. And twice more, I could have sworn I heard children laughing somewhere behind us in the trees. When we got back to the visitor center, I was relieved to hand the kids over to their teachers and get them loaded onto the warm school bus. But that relief didn't last long. The next morning, I found a message waiting for me from the school principal. 3 of the children from yesterday's trip had come to school talking about their new friends from Dark Hollow. They were describing elaborate games of tag and hide-and-seek with children in old-fashioned clothing. Sarah Mitchell had drawn a picture of a little girl in a long dress and bonnet. The detail was remarkable, down to the tiny buttons on the dress and the sad expression in the girl's eyes. But what worried the principal was that these 3 kids, Sarah, Tommy, and Maria, were acting different. They seemed distracted, like they were listening to something no one else could hear. During recess, they stood by the fence looking toward the mountains instead of playing with their friends, and they kept asking when they could go back to Dark Hollow. I tried to put it out of my mind. Kids have active imaginations. They get excited about field trips, and sometimes the excitement lingers. But over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about those bare footprints in the cold earth, or the way Michael had seemed confused about how he'd gotten so far from the group. A week later, David and I decided to hike back to Dark Hollow. Just the 2 of us, to check on the area and maybe put our minds at ease. It was another gray November day, but warmer than the week before, probably 40 degrees. We made good time on the trail, talking about normal ranger stuff, upcoming winter preparations, budget meetings, equipment orders. Everything felt normal. Until we reached the ruins. The temperature dropped the dang. The moment we stepped into the clearing. Not gradually, it was like walking into a freezer. Our breath started misting immediately. "That's weird," David muttered, pulling his jacket tighter. Weather report said it would stay in the 40s today. I was looking at the ground near the cemetery. There were new footprints. Dozens of them. All small, all bare, circling around the old headstones like children had been playing ring around the rosy. "David, look at this." He came over and stared at the prints. "Those weren't here last week. No other groups have been out here since our school trip." We followed the trail of footprints. They led from the cemetery to the old foundation stones, then around and between the ruins in complicated patterns. Like an elaborate game of tag. That's when I noticed something else. Scattered among the ruins were small objects that hadn't been there before. A wooden hoop, a cornhusk doll with a faded blue dress, a set of marbles made from real clay, old-fashioned toys, the kind children might have played with in the 1,840 seconds. David picked up the cornhusk doll and turned it over in his hands. "This looks handmade, and old, really old. But it can't be from the original settlement. Nothing like this would survive over 100 years outdoors." As we stood there examining the doll, I heard something that made my blood freeze. Faint giggling, like children trying to muffle their laughter during a game of hide-and-seek. I spun around, scanning the ruins. "Did you hear that?" David nodded, his eyes wide. "Where did it come from?" The giggling came again, closer this time. It seemed to be coming from behind the largest foundation stone. We walked over slowly, David still holding the cornhusk doll. Behind the stone, the ground was covered with a thick layer of fallen leaves. But as we watched, the leaves began to move. Not from wind. There was no wind. They were being pushed aside from underneath, like invisible hands were digging through them. Then, for just a moment, I saw her. A little girl, maybe 7 years old, with long blonde braids and a blue dress that looked like it belonged in a museum. She was kneeling in the leaves, completely focused on arranging something I couldn't see. Her skin was pale. Not just pale, but translucent, like I was looking at her through frosted glass. I blinked, and she was gone. But the leaves were still moving. "Rebecca," David's voice was barely a whisper. "Did you see?" The little girl, "Yes." We stood frozen, afraid to move or speak too loudly. The temperature had dropped even more. Ice crystals were forming on the stone foundations, even though it was the middle of the day. That's when we heard the voices. Multiple children, all talking at once, but so quietly we couldn't make out words. It sounded like they were having a very serious discussion about something important. Then one voice rose above the others. A little boy's voice, clear and excited. New friends. They came back. Can we play with them? And a girl's voice, worried. Mama said not to talk to strangers. But they're not strangers anymore. They came to visit us before. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. These voices were talking about us. About our visit with the school group. David, I whispered, we need to leave. Now. But before we could move, the voices got louder and more excited. Look, they brought her back, said the little boy's voice. David looked down at the cornhusk doll in his hands. As we watched, the faded blue dress seemed to get brighter, like color was bleeding back into the old fabric. They brought Mary back, cried the girl's voice. Oh, Mary, we missed you so much. The doll in David's hands was getting warm. Not just warm, hot. He dropped it with a gasp, and it landed on the leaf-covered ground. Where it fell, the leaves scattered, away by themselves, forming a perfect circle. And in that circle, for just a few seconds, I could see them clearly. 5 children, maybe 6, all wearing clothes from over a century ago. They were sitting in a circle around the cornhusk doll, reaching out to touch it with expressions of pure joy on their pale faces. They looked up at us with eyes that were ancient and sad and desperately lonely. Will you play with us? Asked the little girl with blonde braids. We've been waiting so long for friends. Then the wind picked up, scattering the leaves back over the circle, and they were gone. But I could still hear them talking, planning games, arguing about the rules like children do. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that we were in terrible danger. We ran. I'm not proud of it, but we ran like scared children, crashing through the underbrush and stumbling down the trail. We didn't stop until we reached the main road, where David's truck was parked. What the hell was that? David gasped, leaning against the truck's hood. I don't know, but we need to find out before anyone else gets hurt. That evening, I drove to the county library and found Agnes Hartwell, the local historian. Agnes was 68 years old and had lived in these mountains her whole life. If anyone would know the real story of Dark Hollow, it would be her. Oh, you don't want to go asking about that place, she said when I mentioned Dark Hollow. Some stones are better left unturned. But I pressed her, and finally, she told me the full story. The diphtheria outbreak of 1847 had been worse than anyone wanted to remember. It started in late November and raged through the settlement for 3 months. 23 children died, ranging in age from 3 to 12. But the worst part was how they died. Isolated from their families to prevent the spread of disease, lying alone in a makeshift hospital while their parents watched helplessly from outside. They died scared and lonely, Agnes said quietly. And according to my grandmother who lived through it, they never really left. The survivors had reported seeing the dead children playing in the ruins long after the settlement was abandoned. Local families avoided the area for decades. Even now, Agnes said, smart folks stayed away from Dark Hollow, especially during the late fall when the veil between worlds grew thin. They're not evil, she explained. They're just children who don't understand they're dead. They want what all children want, friends to play with. But they don't understand that living children can't survive in their world. What do you mean? My grandmother said they try to bring living children across, to join them permanently. They think they're being kind, inviting friends to play forever. But forever means dead, Miss Thornbrook. I thought about Michael's confusion, the way he couldn't remember wandering away from the group. About Sarah and the other kids who seemed distracted, who kept asking to go back. How do we stop them? Agnes shook her head sadly. You can't stop them. You can only hope to help them understand. But that's dangerous work, and it's cost good people their lives. The next morning, I got a call that made my blood run cold. Sarah Mitchell's mother was on the phone, crying. Rebecca, I don't know what to do. Sarah snuck out of the house last night. We found her this morning, walking along the highway, heading toward the mountains. She said her new friends were calling to her. She said they needed her to come play with them right away. Sarah was at the hospital, being treated for mild hypothermia. But the doctor said she was fine physically. It was her mental state that worried them. She kept talking about promises she had made to her friends, about games they had planned. That afternoon, I got 2 more calls. Tommy and Maria had also tried to leave their homes in the middle of the doll at night, drawn by voices only they could hear. I knew I had to go back to Dark Hollow. Not with a group, not with David. I couldn't risk anyone else. These spirit children had somehow formed a connection with the kids from our field trip, and they were trying to call them back. I hiked the 3 miles alone, carrying a heavy pack with emergency supplies. The November sky was dark and threatening, with snow clouds building over the peaks. By the time I reached the ruins, the first flakes were beginning to fall. The clearing felt different this time. The air hummed with energy, like the moment before a thunderstorm. The temperature was well below freezing, and frost covered every surface, despite the fact that it was only late afternoon. "I know you're here," I called out to the empty ruins. "I know you're trying to call the children back, but you can't do that. You're hurting them." The response came immediately. Children's voices, all talking at once, excited and defensive. "We're not hurting them. We just want friends. We've been alone for so long." They promised they'd come back and play. I could see them now, flickering in and out of visibility among the stone foundations. More than I'd seen before. Maybe a dozen children, all wearing the simple clothes of 1,842 mountain folk. They looked at me with a mixture of hope and suspicion. "I understand that you're lonely," I said gently, using the same voice I used with frightened children in the wilderness. "But the children who came here before, they're alive. They have families who love them. If you bring them here to stay forever, their families will be heartbroken." A little girl with dark hair stepped forward. She was maybe 8 years old, wearing a patched brown dress and bare feet that should have been blue with cold. "That they wanted to play with us," she said sadly. "They said we could be friends. You can be friends. But not the way you're thinking. Living children need to stay in the living world, with their families. Just like you needed to stay with your families when you were alive." "We don't have families anymore," said a boy who looked about 10. "Everyone went away and left us here." My heart broke for them. They were just children, trapped by tragedy and loneliness, not understanding what had happened to them. "I know," I said softly. "I know your families had to leave, and that must have been so scary. But they didn't want to leave you. They had to go, because staying here made them sick too." The spirit children looked at each other uncertainly. I could see them becoming more solid, more real, as our conversation continued. The temperature dropped even further, and the falling snow began to swirl in impossible patterns around the ruins. "Will you tell us about our families?" asked the little girl with dark hair. "We remember some things, but not everything." So I sat down on a fallen log and told them what Agnes had shared with me. How their parents had loved them, had stayed as long as they could, had grieved for them long after they died, how the whole community had been torn apart by loss. As I talked, more spirit children appeared. Some I could see clearly now, others were just shadows and whispers. They gathered around me like students at story time, hungry for connection and understanding. "The thing is," I said gently, "your parents eventually had to let you go. Not because they stopped loving you, but because holding on was hurting everyone. Sometimes love means letting go, even when it's the hardest thing in the world." "But we don't want to be alone anymore," whispered a very small boy, maybe 4 years old. "You won't be alone. Your families are waiting for you, wherever people go when they die. They've been waiting all this time for you to join them. But you have to let go of this place first." The spirit children looked at each other with ancient eyes and tedious, young faces. I could see them struggling with the concept, just like living children struggle with difficult truths. "What about our new friends?" asked the girl with blonde braids, the one Sarah had drawn. "We don't want to hurt them." "Then you have to let them go too. You have to stop calling to them." "Can you do that?" There was a long moment of silence, filled only by the sound of snow falling on stone. Then, one by one, the spirit children nodded. "We can try," said the dark-haired girl who seemed to be their leader. "But what if we get scared? What if we change our minds? Then you remember that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the right thing even when you are scared. And the right thing is to let your new friends live their lives and to go find your families." The temperature began to rise slightly. The unnatural wind died down, and the snow started falling normally again. "Will you help us?" asked the little girl. "Will you? Would help us find the way?" I nodded, though I had no idea how. "I'll try." What happened next is hard to describe. The spirit children joined hands in a circle around the cemetery, and they began to sing. It was a lullaby I'd never heard before, in voices that were growing fainter and more distant with each note. As they sang, the air around them began to shimmer, like heat waves rising from summer pavement. One by one, they started to fade. Not disappearing, exactly, but becoming transparent, as if they were walking away through glass. The little girl with dark hair was the last to go. She looked at me with eyes that seemed far older than her 8 years. "Thank you for helping us understand," she said. "We'll try to be good and not call to the living children anymore." "You're very brave," I told her. "Your families will be so proud of you." She smiled then, the first truly happy expression I'd seen on any of their faces. "Will you remember us? Will you tell people we were here?" "I promise." Then she was gone, and I was alone in the ruins with nothing but falling snow and the sound of wind in the trees. The temperature returned to normal almost immediately. The oppressive atmosphere that had hung over Dark Hollow lifted like fog burning off in sunlight. When I checked my watch, I was amazed to discover that our entire conversation had lasted less than an hour. I hiked back to town as snow began to fall in earnest. By the time I reached my truck, I had a plan. 3 days later, I returned to Dark Hollow with Agnes Hartwell and a crew of volunteers. We spent the day clearing brush from the old cemetery and resetting the fallen headstones. Agnes had researched the names of all 23 children who died in the outbreak, and we made sure each grave was properly marked. At sunset, we held a small memorial service. Agnes read the names of the dead children, and we left flowers on each grave. It felt like the right thing to do. No flowers, a formal goodbye that had been over a century overdue. I never saw the spirit children again after that night. The oppressive cold around the ruins was gone, replaced by the normal chill of late autumn. Dark Hollow became just what it should have been, a place of historical interest where tragic events had occurred long ago. The 3 children from our school group, Sarah, Tommy, and Maria, returned to normal within a week. Their parents reported that they stopped asking about going back to the mountains and resumed their regular activities. Sarah even drew me a new picture. The same little girl in the blue dress, but this time she was smiling and surrounded by other children who looked like family. I still lead school groups to Dark Hollow several times a year. I tell them about the settlement, about the families who tried to make a life in these harsh mountains, and about the tragedy that ended it all. The kids are fascinated by the history, just like always. But I also tell them something else now. I tell them that sometimes, when people die before they're ready, especially children, they can get stuck between worlds. Not because they're evil or dangerous, but because they're scared and lonely and don't understand what's happened to them. And I tell them that the greatest kindness we can show to the dead is to remember them with love and then let them go. Some of the kids ask if I've ever seen a ghost. I always tell them the truth. Yes, I have. And that the thing about real ghosts is they're not monsters trying to hurt you. They're just people who need help finding their way home. Winter came early that year, and by December, Dark Hollow was buried under 3 feet of snow. But when spring returned and I made my first hike back to the ruins, I found something that made me smile. Someone had left fresh flowers on the children's graves. Not the artificial kind that last all season, but real wildflowers that must have been picked that very day. Agnes swore it wasn't her, and no other groups had been in the area. I like to think their families found them at last and stopped by to say hello. Sometimes love really does find a way, even across impossible distances, even across death itself. I still work these mountains, still lead kids through the wilderness, still help lost children find their way back to safety. But now I know that some children need a different kind of help, the kind that comes from understanding and forgiveness, and the simple human kindness of being remembered. Dark Hollow is peaceful now, but on quiet November evenings, when the mist rises from the valley and the first snow touches the mountain peaks, I sometimes think I can hear something carried on the wind. Not the lonely laughter of lost children, the sound of families, together again at last. My name is Margaret Ironwood, and I've been a park ranger for 15 years. People always ask me about the strangest thing I've ever seen in the mountains. Until August of 1981, I would have told them about the time I found a black bear that had somehow gotten itself stuck upside down in a hollow tree. That was before Backbone Rock. Before I learned that some old stories aren't stories at all. I work in the Cherokee National Forest in Tennessee, mostly around the Backbone Rock Recreation Area. It's a beautiful place. There's this natural rock tunnel that cars can drive right through, like nature built its own highway overpass. The forest around it is thick with rhododendron bushes and old oak trees that have been growing since before my great-grandmother was born. I used to be a college professor, teaching about animal behavior. Had a nice office, a house in the suburbs, a husband who left me for his secretary. Pretty typical story. After the divorce, I decided I'd rather study animals in the wild than in textbooks. The mountains called to me, I guess. Seemed like a good place to start over. The locals always had stories about these woods. Old Cherokee legends about something called the Wampus Cat, some kind of creature that was part woman, part mountain lion. The older folks, especially the Cherokee elders, would get real serious when they talked about it. But I'm a scientist. I believe in facts, evidence, things I can measure and document. Mountain monsters weren't on my list of real concerns. I specialized in wildlife research and tracking. In 15 years, I'd relocated over 500 animals, bears mostly, but also wildcats, coyotes, even a few escaped exotic pets. I could tell you what an animal had for breakfast just by looking at its tracks. I could age a footprint to within hours. I thought I knew everything the mountains could throw at me. The summer of 1981 was brutal. Day after day of heat that made the air shimmer like water, and every afternoon storm clouds would build up like dark mountains in the sky. The animals were acting strange, more aggressive, more territorial. Even the birds seemed on edge. That's when the livestock killing started. First, it was Emmett Johnson's goats, about 5 miles south of the tunnel. 3 of them, killed clean and surgical-like. Whatever did it knew exactly where to bite to drop them fast. No struggle, no defensive wounds. Just 3 dead goats with their throats opened up neat as you please. Then Mary Calhoun lost 2 sheep the same way. Then old Pete Williams found his prize bull dead in the morning, and that bull weighed near 1,000 pounds. Whatever killed it was strong enough to bring down something that big without making enough noise to wake Pete, and he slept light on account of his bad back. The killing pattern bothered me. Most predators are messy eaters. They tear and rip, leave lots of evidence behind. This was different, clean, almost surgical, like something that understood anatomy. But the really strange part was what the local hunters were saying. Tom Bradley swore he heard something screaming in the woods that sounded like a woman calling for help. But when he went to look, all he found were cat tracks, bigger than any mountain lion he'd ever seen. Sarah Mitchell claimed she saw something moving through the trees that looked like a person one second and an animal the next. But Sarah was known to take a drink now and then, so folks didn't put much stock in that. Still, I had to investigate. It was my job. I packed up my tracking kit, plaster for making casts, my good Leupold binoculars, specimen collection bags, my trail cameras. Everything I needed to figure out what kind of predator we were dealing with. I figured it was probably a displaced mountain lion, maybe even an escaped exotic cat from some private collection. Big cats were rare in these parts, but not impossible. The drought might have pushed one down from higher elevations, looking for water and easy prey. I was wrong about a lot of things that summer, but I was dead wrong about this being just another animal relocation job. The first thing I noticed at Emmett's place was the silence. I'd been investigating animal attacks for years, and there's always noise. Flies buzzing around the kill site, birds calling, insects humming, something. But Emmett's pasture was quiet as a grave. Even the wind seemed to avoid the spot where his goats had died. The tracks told a story I didn't want to believe. They started normal enough. Big cat prints, probably a mountain lion, maybe 120 pounds or so. The stride length looked right, the claw marks were consistent. I made my plaster casts, took my measurements, documented everything like always. But about 20 feet from the kill site, something impossible happened to those tracks. The back paws started looking different, longer, the pad shape changed. By the time I followed them to the tree line, they looked less like cat prints and more like, well, like bare human feet. Big ones, but definitely human. I stared at those casts for an hour, trying to make sense of it. Maybe there had been 2 different animals. Maybe a person had walked through after the attack. But the depth and spacing were wrong for that. These prints were made at the same time, by the same creature, in the same gait pattern. I'd never seen anything like it in 15 years of tracking. The next site was worse. Mary Calhoun's sheep had been killed behind her barn, near the edge of Beaver Dam Creek. The attack pattern was identical: quick, clean kills, surgical precision. But this time, I found something that made my hands shake when I bagged it for analysis. Hair. Lots of it. At first glance, it looked like mountain lion fur, tawny brown, coarse texture, about the right length. But when I looked closer, with my magnifying glass, some of the strands were different. Finer. Almost like human hair, but not quite. And the smell. God, the smell. It wasn't just cat musk, though that was there. It was something else mixed in: rough, human sweat, but wrong somehow. Sour and sharp, like fear sweat, but with an animal undertone that made my skin crawl. I set up trail cameras at 3 different locations, hoping to catch our predator in the act. The cameras had motion sensors that could detect anything bigger than a rabbit from 50 yards away. They'd helped me document dozens of animal behaviors over the years. 2 days later, I went back to check them. Every single camera showed the same thing: static, hours and hours of white noise and electronic snow, exactly during the times when the motion sensors had been triggered. Something had been there, something big enough to set off the sensors, but the cameras couldn't record it properly. Equipment malfunction, I told myself. Maybe the heat was affecting the dumb electronics. Maybe the humidity was causing interference. There had to be a rational explanation. But deep down, I was starting to doubt my own certainty about what was possible in these mountains. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Sheriff Ray Hawkins had retired the year before, after 30 years of keeping the peace in our little corner of Tennessee. He was known as the most level-headed, no-nonsense lawman in 3 counties. Ray didn't drink, didn't tell tall tales, and didn't believe in anything he couldn't arrest and put in a jail cell. So when Ray showed up at my ranger station, his face pale as old bone, I knew something was seriously wrong. "Margaret," he said, settling his bulk into the chair across from my desk. "I need to tell you something about what's been killing the livestock. And I need you to promise you won't think I've lost my mind." I poured him coffee and waited. I was up on Forge Creek Road yesterday evening, checking on my beat of 4. "Beehives," he started. "You know that clearing about a quarter-mile past the old logging bridge?" I nodded. I knew the spot. "Well, I heard something moving in the brush, figured it might be a bear getting into the hives. So I grabbed my flashlight and went to take a look." He paused, his hands trembling slightly around the coffee cup. "What I saw. Margaret, I've been telling myself for 2 days that I imagined it, that the light was playing tricks, but I can't shake it." "What did you see, Ray?" He looked me straight in the eye. "I saw a woman standing at the edge of the clearing. Tall, thin, wearing what looked like an old dress. She was just standing there, staring at my hives. But when my light hit her, her eyes..." Another pause. Ray was sweating now, despite the morning chill. Her eyes reflected the light. Yellow, like a cat's eyes. And when she saw me seeing her, she smiled. Not a human smile, Margaret. Too many teeth. Too sharp. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. What happened then? She dropped down on all 4s. Right there in front of me, smooth as silk. And then she changed. I don't know how else to describe it. 1 second I was looking at a woman. The next second, there was the biggest mountain lion I've ever seen. Had to be pushing 200 pounds. Ray drained his coffee in 1 gulp and stood up. It looked at me for maybe 10 seconds, then turned and ran into the woods. But Margaret, the way it moved. It wasn't like any animal I've ever seen. It moved like it was thinking, like it was deciding whether or not to come after me. He headed for the door, then turned back. I don't know what's out there, but it ain't natural. And I think it's getting bolder. After Ray left, I sat alone in my office, staring at the evidence I'd collected. The impossible tracks, the mixed hair samples, the camera static, the professional, surgical kills. For the first time in my career, I started to consider the possibility that the old Cherokee stories might not be stories at all. I should have left it alone, should have called in the state wildlife department, let them deal with whatever was stalking our mountains. But I couldn't. 15 years of training told me there had to be a logical explanation, and my gut told me that people were going to die if I didn't figure this out fast. I decided to spend a night in the woods, watching one of the kill sites. If our predator was returning to its hunting grounds, I'd be there to document it properly. Real evidence. Real proof. I set up my camp about 100 yards from where Pete Williams had lost his bull, hidden in a thick stand of rhododendron bushes. Good sight lines, multiple escape routes, and close enough to the creek that I could use the water as a barrier if I needed to retreat quickly. The sun went down around 8 o'clock, and the forest should have come alive with night sounds. Should have heard owls calling, raccoons, chattering, the rustle of small animals moving through the underbrush. Instead, silence. Not just quiet, the kind of absolute silence that makes your ears ring. Like every living thing in a mile radius had suddenly stopped breathing. Around 10 o'clock, I caught a whiff of that smell again. Cat musk mixed with human sweat, stronger now, close enough to make my eyes water. Something was moving through the trees, but I couldn't see it, couldn't hear it. Just that smell getting stronger and stronger. Then I felt it watching me. You know that feeling when someone's staring at you from across a room? That prickle between your shoulder blades that makes you turn around? It was like that, but amplified. Like being watched by something that could see every detail of your face in complete darkness. I slowly reached for my spotlight, trying not to make any sudden movements. My hands were shaking so bad I nearly dropped it twice. When I finally got it aimed toward where I thought the presence was strongest, I took a deep breath and flicked it on. Yellow eyes. About 50 feet away, up on a rocky ledge that shouldn't have been climbable. 2 yellow eyes, reflecting my light like mirrors, set in the face of the biggest mountain lion I'd ever seen. But Ray was right. There was something wrong with those eyes. They were too intelligent, too aware. Like looking into the eyes of a person wearing a cat costume, we stared at each other for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. Then, it did something that made my blood freeze. It smiled. Not the way a cat shows its teeth when it's aggressive. This was a human smile. Deliberate. Like it was enjoying a private joke. Then it turned and melted back into the darkness, moving without making a sound. I packed up my camp and hiked back to my truck in record time, checking over my shoulder every few steps. Something had decided to let me live that night. I didn't want to push my luck. The next morning, I drove back to the site in daylight to look for tracks. What I found made me question everything I thought I knew about the natural world. The tracks were there, clear as day in the soft earth near the creek. But they told an impossible story. The creature had approached my hiding spot from 3 different directions. The tracks showed it had circled my position multiple times, getting closer with each pass. It had climbed that rocky ledge, a vertical face that would challenge an experienced rock climber with ropes and equipment. And then, about 20 feet from where I'd been hiding, the tracks changed again. From cat to human. 4 legs to 2. The transition was gradual this time, like I was watching the transformation happen in slow motion through the prints in the mud. But the most disturbing thing was the final set of tracks. Human footprints, leading right up to within 10 feet of where I'd been sitting. They stopped at the edge of my beast grade. Light, where anyone standing there would have been able to see me clearly. Whatever it was, it had been close enough to touch me. And it had chosen not to. I needed help. Professional help. Billy Hawthorne had been working these mountains since before I was born. 23 years as a ranger, and he'd grown up here before that. If anyone knew about the old stories, the local legends, it would be Billy. I found him at the maintenance shed, working on a trail mower that had seen better days. "Billy," I said, "I need to ask you about something the old-timers talk about." He looked up from the engine, wiping grease off his hands with a rag. "This about them livestock killings?" "Maybe. You ever hear stories about something called the Wampus cat?" Billy's expression changed. The easy smile disappeared, replaced by something I'd never seen on his face before. Worry, maybe even fear. "Where'd you hear that name, Margaret?" "Around, people talking." "Billy, what is it?" He sat down on an overturned bucket and looked out toward the mountains. "My grandmother used to tell stories. Cherokee stories. Passed down from her grandmother. Most of them were just tales to keep kids from wandering too far into the woods at night. But not all of them? The Wampus cat was different. Grandmother would get real serious when she talked about it. Said it was a woman once, a Cherokee woman who broke the old laws. Spied on a sacred ceremony she wasn't supposed to see. The medicine men cursed her for it. What kind of curse? Billy was quiet for a long moment. They say she was trapped between human and animal. Can't be fully one or the other. Doomed to hunt these mountains forever, never able to find peace. Billy, that's just a story, a legend. He looked at me with eyes that had seen too much. Maybe, but my grandmother always said the curse was real. Said the wampus cat shows up every generation or so, when the balance gets disturbed. When people forget to respect the old ways. That evening, I made a decision that would change everything. I needed to talk to someone who knew the old stories better than Billy. Someone who might understand what we were really dealing with. Mary Walkingstick lived in a small house about 5 miles from the tunnel, on land her family had owned since before the government made it a national forest. She was Cherokee, 73 years old, and known as a keeper of the traditional stories. She was sitting on her porch when I drove up, like she'd been expecting me. "You're the ranger," she said before I could introduce myself. "You've been tracking something you don't understand." "Yes, ma'am. I was hoping you might be able to help me." She studied my face for a long moment, then nodded toward the chair beside her. "Tell me what you've seen." I told her everything. The tracks that changed from animal to human, the impossible kills, the yellow eyes, and the too intelligent smile. When I finished, Mary was quiet for so long I thought she might have fallen asleep. "She's awake?" Mary finally said. "The cursed one." I hoped she would stay sleeping, but the signs have been there for months. The signs? Animals leaving their territories. Birds flying south in summer, the way the storms build but don't break. Mary looked toward the mountains. "She's been sleeping for 40 years. Something woke her up." "Mrs. Walkingstick, with all due respect, I need more than stories. People might die." Mary stood up and walked to the edge of her porch. "You think because you have degrees and equipment that you understand these mountains? You've been here 15 years. My people have been here for thousands. Some knowledge doesn't come from books." She turned back to face me. "The wampus cat is real, Ranger Ironwood, and if she's hunting again, it means she's looking for something, or someone. What does she want? Redemption or revenge? Sometimes the two look the same." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what Mary had said, about curses and redemption and the balance being disturbed. Part of me still wanted to believe there was a scientific explanation for everything I'd seen, but a bigger part of me was starting to understand that I was dealing with something far beyond my training and experience, and that maybe, just maybe, the old stories were the only map I had for the territory I was about to enter. 3 days later, everything changed. The Jenkins family had driven down from Virginia for a camping trip. Nice folks, mom, dad, 2 kids around 8 and 10 years old. They'd set up their tent at the campground near Backbone Rock, planning to spend a week hiking and fishing. I was doing my evening patrol when I found their campsite empty. Dinner was still cooking over the fire. Marshmallows laid out for s'mores. The kids' bikes were lying on their sides, like they'd been dropped in a hurry. No signs of struggle, no blood, no tracks leading away from the camp. The family had simply vanished. I called it in immediately, started search procedures. Within 2 hours, we had dogs, helicopters, and 50 volunteers combing every inch of the forest. The state police brought in their best tracking team. We found nothing. It was like 4 people had just dissolved into thin air. But as the sun went down and the search teams headed back to base camp, I decided to check one more place. The tunnel itself. Backbone Rock Tunnel is about 20 feet high and maybe 15 feet wide, carved by water over thousands of years. Cars can drive right through it, but most people stop to take pictures. It's one of those natural wonders that makes you believe in magic. I parked at the mouth of the tunnel and grabbed my high-powered flashlight. The temperature dropped at least 10 degrees as soon as I stepped inside. The walls were damp, with condensation, and my footsteps echoed weird in the confined space. About halfway through, I heard something that made me stop dead. Crying, soft, muffled crying, like a child trying not to make noise. "Hello?" I called out. "This is Ranger Ironwood. Is someone there?" The crying stopped. I swept my flashlight beam across the tunnel walls, looking for any crack or crevice where someone might be hiding. The walls were solid limestone, No openings big enough for a person. If you can hear me, I'm here to help. Can you tell me where you are? That's when I heard the voice. Help us. It was a woman's voice, coming from somewhere above me. But when I aimed my light upward, I saw only the curved ceiling of the tunnel, maybe 8 feet overhead. No ledges, no openings, nowhere for a person to be. Where are you? I called. Keep talking so I can find you. Help us, the voice repeated. But this time, it sounded different. Less human, like someone trying to imitate human speech but not quite getting it right. I backed toward the tunnel entrance, keeping my light trained on the ceiling. That's when I saw the eyes. 2 yellow eyes, staring down at me from what should have been solid rock. As I watched, the limestone seemed to ripple like water, and a shape began to emerge from the ceiling. It started as a woman, tall, gaunt, wearing what looked like traditional Cherokee clothing. Her black hair hung loose around her shoulders, and her skin was pale as bone. But her eyes were the yellow eyes of a hunting cat. She smiled that too wide smile I'd seen before, showing teeth that were definitely not human. "You've been looking for me," she said, and her voice was like gravel mixed with honey. The ranger who doesn't believe in stories. "Where's the family?" I managed to ask. "The Jenkins family. Where are they?" She tilted her head like a cat studying a mouse. "Safe. For now. They're in the place, between places, where I keep my treasures. Let them go. They haven't done anything to you." She laughed, and the sound echoed through the tunnel like breaking glass. "Haven't done anything? They camp on sacred ground. They fish in sacred waters. They treat these mountains like their playground." As she spoke, her form began to shift. Her hands grew longer, the fingers ending in claws. Her jaw extended, showing more of those sharp teeth. She was changing, right in front of me, from woman to something else. "Just like you," she continued, "now more cat than human. Walking through my domain with your equipment and your arrogance, thinking you can understand everything with your science." I reached for my radio, but my hands weren't working right. The air in the tunnel had gotten thick, hard to breathe. "What do you want?" "I want to be free." Her voice was getting deeper, more animal. "For 150 years, I've been trapped between forms, between worlds. The curse holds me here, in these mountains, never able to rest." "Then let me help you," I said, surprising myself. "Tell me how to break the curse." She paused in her transformation, tilting her massive head. "You would help me? Even knowing what I am? If it means saving those people, yes." For a moment, something almost human flickered in those yellow eyes. "The curse can only be broken by willing sacrifice. Someone must choose to take my place, to carry the burden of being trapped between worlds. And if someone did that, you'd be free? Free to find the peace that has been denied to me for so long." She was fully changed now, a mountain lion, the size of a small horse, but still speaking with a human voice. But the choice must be made freely, with full knowledge of the cost. I thought about the Jenkins family, somewhere in this creature's supernatural prison. I thought about other families who would come to these mountains, not knowing what hunted here. I thought about the old Cherokee stories and the weight of curses that lasted generations. "Show me the family first," I said. "Prove to me they're alive." She smiled again, and this time it looked almost sad. "You are braver than I expected, Ranger Ironwood." "Very well." The walls of the tunnel began to shift and flow like water. Reality bent around us, and suddenly we were somewhere else entirely, a vast cavern lit by an impossible silver light. In the center, huddled together on a flat rock, were the Jenkins family. They looked terrified but unharmed. "They cannot see or hear us," the Wampus cat said. "We are between the worlds here, in the space where I have wandered for so long." "Let them go," I said. "Send them back to their campsite, safe and unharmed. And I'll make the exchange." She studied me with those ancient, intelligent eyes. "You would doom yourself to save strangers? It's my job to protect people in these mountains, even from things I don't understand. And you understand this is not death? This is something far more difficult. You would be trapped as I have been trapped, caught between human and animal, never able to rest, never able to die." I looked at the family, at the 2 kids clinging to their parents, and made my choice. Yes, The creature that had once been a Cherokee woman looked at me for a long moment. Then she did something I never expected. She laughed, but this laugh was different, full of relief and something that might have been joy. "You would make that sacrifice," she said. "You would choose to carry this burden for strangers. That choice, that willingness, it changes everything." The silver light around us began to brighten. The curse was born from selfishness, from taking what was not mine to take. But it can be broken by its opposite, by someone willing to give everything for others. "I don't understand." "You don't need to take my place, Ranger Ironwood. Your willingness to do so is enough." The curse is broken by the offer of willing sacrifice, not by the sacrifice itself. The cavern began to dissolve around us. The family faded from view, but I could somehow sense them returning safely to their campsite, with no memory of this supernatural prison. "They're safe?" I asked. "They are safe. And I?" She paused, her form beginning to shimmer like heat waves. "I am finally free to rest." "Wait," I said. "What was your name? Your real name, before the curse?" She smiled one last time, and for a moment she looked completely human again. "Ayanna, my name was Ayanna." Then she was gone, dissolved into points of silver light that faded like dying stars. I found myself standing alone in the tunnel, my flashlight dead in my hand. But somehow, I could see perfectly. The tunnel was filled with a soft, warm glow that seemed to come from the walls themselves. I walked back to my truck in that gentle light, feeling like the mountains themselves were saying goodbye. The Jenkins family was found the next morning at their campsite, sleeping peacefully in their tent. When the state police interviewed them, they had no memory of being missing. As far as they knew, they'd spent a quiet evening roasting marshmallows and telling stories around the campfire. The livestock killings stopped immediately. The oppressive heat broke that same night, and the first normal thunderstorm in weeks rolled through the mountains, washing the air clean. Billy Hawthorne found me at my office a few days later, reading reports and trying to make sense of everything that had happened. "Heard the search for that family ended well," he said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "They're fine, no harm done. And whatever was killing the livestock?" I looked up from my paperwork. "I think it moved on. Found what it was looking for." Billy nodded slowly. "My grandmother always said the old debts get paid eventually. One way or another." "Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman." "She was." He stood to leave, then paused at the door. "Margaret, these mountains are old. Older than we understand. Sometimes the best thing we can do is listen to the stories and respect what we don't fully comprehend. I'm learning that, Billy." After he left, I sat alone in my office, thinking about curses and redemption and the weight of choices made long ago. I thought about Ayanna, trapped for a century and a half between human and animal, carrying the burden of her mistake until someone was willing to share it. I kept working the Cherokee National Forest for another 12 years before I retired. In all that time, I never encountered anything like the Wampus cat again, but I developed a deep respect for the old stories, the traditional knowledge that the Cherokee people had preserved for generations. I also started keeping careful records of unusual incidents, encounters that didn't fit the normal patterns of wildlife behavior, sightings that defied scientific explanation. I built a quiet network with other rangers, park officials, and Native American tribal leaders across the Appalachian region. Because Ayanna had taught me something important. Just because something can't be explained by conventional science doesn't mean it isn't real. And sometimes, the old stories aren't just entertainment, they're survival guides for territories we're only beginning to understand. The mountains keep their secrets well, but occasionally, for those willing to listen, they share their wisdom. I still work as a consulting wildlife specialist, helping other rangers and researchers understand unusual animal behaviors. Most of the cases have perfectly natural explanations. But every now and then, I encounter something that reminds me of that night in Backbone Rock Tunnel. When that happens, I remember what Mary Walking Stick told me years ago. Some knowledge doesn't come from books. Some truths are older than our understanding, deeper than our science, and more powerful than our certainty about what's possible in this world. The Cherokee National Forest is still one of the most beautiful places on Earth. Families still camp at Backbone Rock, still drive through the tunnel and marvel at nature's architecture. Children still roast marshmallows and tell ghost stories around campfires. And sometimes, late at night when the moon is dark and the forest holds its breath, I think I can feel Ayana's presence in the mountains. Not as a cursed creature trapped between worlds, but as a peaceful spirit finally at rest, watching over the land she loved enough to sacrifice everything for. The old stories say that some debts take generations to pay, but they also say that redemption is always possible. For those brave enough to choose love over fear, sacrifice over selfishness. I learned the truth of that in a limestone tunnel on a hot August night from a woman who had been waiting a century and a half for someone to understand that even the most ancient curses can be broken by the simple act of being willing to help. The mountains remember everything, and sometimes, if you listen carefully, they'll teach you that the difference between a monster and a guardian is often just a matter of understanding the story behind the legend. My name is Vincent Stormcrow, and I've been watching these West Virginia mountains from the air for 19 years. 19 years of flying over the Monongahela National Forest, checking for fires, counting wildlife, and making sure hikers don't get themselves killed in the wilderness. In all that time, I thought I'd seen everything these mountains had to offer. I was wrong. People always ask me about my last name, Stormcrow. My grandmother was Cherokee, and she used to tell me it meant conquering bird of the tempest. As a kid, I figured it was just a cool name. Now, after what happened in the Cranberry Wilderness, I think maybe it was more like a warning. I'm 45 years old, been flying since I was 18. Did my time in the Air Force, flew cargo planes over Vietnam, had a bad crash in '72 that left me with a metal rod in my left leg and a medical discharge. The leg aches when storms are coming, but it doesn't stop me from flying. Nothing stops me from flying. After the service, I came back home to West Virginia and got a job with the Forest Service. They needed someone who could handle the tough flying conditions in the mountains. Sudden weather changes, tricky winds, emergency landings in tight spots. I was perfect for the job. Had my commercial pilot license, over 10,000 hours in the air, and I knew these mountains like the back of my hand. The Cranberry Wilderness is my main territory. 26,000 acres of some of the wildest country left in West Virginia. It's high up, over 4,000 feet in places, and the weather can turn deadly in minutes. We've got acid bogs up there that'll swallow a man whole, thick forests where you can get lost 50 feet from a trail, and drop-offs that go down forever. Most people don't realize how isolated it really is. The nearest real road is 20 miles away. If something goes wrong up there, helicopter rescue is your only hope. And if the weather's bad, even helicopters can't help you. I work out of a small ranger station near the wilderness boundary. Just me and a few other rangers covering all that territory. My main job is aerial surveys, flying over the area in my Bell 206 helicopter, looking for fires, checking on hikers, monitoring wildlife. It's good work, and I'm good at it. September 1976 was shaping up to be a quiet month. The summer tourists were gone, hunting season hadn't started yet, and the weather was cooling down. Perfect flying weather, except for the fog. We'd been getting these thick fog banks rolling in at night, unusual for September. The kind of fog that makes everything look different, makes familiar places seem strange. I remember the morning it all started. September 15th. I was doing my usual morning patrol, flying north over the Cranberry Glades. The glades are these high-altitude bogs, open meadows surrounded by dark spruce forests. From the air, they look like eyes staring up at the sky. The first thing I noticed was the silence on the radio. Usually, I'd hear chatter from other aircraft, commercial flights heading to Charleston, private planes, maybe another Forest Service helicopter, but that morning, nothing. Dead quiet. Then I saw something that made me turn the helicopter around for a second look. The Cranberry Glades were empty. Completely empty. No birds, no deer, nothing moving at all. In 19 years of flying over those meadows, I'd never seen them without some kind of wildlife. Even in the dead of winter, there were always ravens or hawks circling around. But that morning, nothing lived in the glades. I radioed back to the station. Base, this is Ranger 7. Are we showing any wildlife disturbance reports for the Cranberry area? Static crackled back at me. Negative Ranger 7, all quiet here. What are you seeing? Nothing, I said. That's the problem. No birds, no animals. The glades look dead. Could be weather-related, came the reply. We've got those fog banks moving in again tonight. Maybe. But I'd flown in plenty of bad weather, and I'd never seen the animals completely abandon an area like that. Animals know things we don't. When they all run away from somewhere, there's usually a good reason. I finished my patrol and headed back to the station, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The mountains felt different somehow, heavier, like the air itself was holding its breath. That afternoon, I got a call that changed everything. The call came in around 3 in the afternoon. Carl Brennan from the FAA was on the line, and he sounded rattled. Carl had been investigating aircraft incidents for 25 years, and nothing rattled him. "Vincent, I need to ask you about something strange," he said. "We've had 3 commercial pilots in the last week report a large flying object pacing their aircraft over the Cranberry area. All 3 described it as bigger than any bird they'd ever seen." I leaned back in my chair. What kind of bird? That's just it. They're not saying it's a bird. They're saying it looked like something else. Something with wings, but different. Carl faxed me the reports. 3 different pilots, 3 different flights, all reporting the same thing. A massive winged creature that had kept pace with their aircraft for several minutes before disappearing into the fog. The descriptions were all similar. Wingspan of 15 to 20 feet, gray or black in color, human-like body with enormous moth wings. The most detailed report came from Captain Mike Torres, a 20-year veteran flying the Charleston to Pittsburgh route. He'd written, "Object maintained speed of approximately 180 miles per hour for 3 minutes. Appeared to be observing aircraft. Wings moved in slow, deliberate motions unlike any bird. Most disturbing feature: 2 large red lights, where eyes would be on a head-shaped protrusion." I called Captain Torres myself. His voice was steady, professional, but I could hear something underneath. Fear, maybe, or confusion. "Mr. Stormcrow, I've been flying for 20 years. I've seen birds, planes, weather balloons, even experimental aircraft. This was none of those things. Tell me exactly what you saw." It came up alongside us at about 8,000 feet, just south of the Cranberry Wilderness. At first, I thought it might be another aircraft, but there was no engine sound, no navigation lights. Then I got a clear look at it through the side window. He paused, and I heard him take a deep breath. It had a human torso, but with wings like a giant moth. The wings had to be 20 feet across, maybe more. And the eyes. God, those eyes. They glowed red, like brake lights. It turned its head and looked right at me through the cockpit window. I've never seen anything look at me like that, like it was studying me. How long did this last? 3 minutes. Maybe 4. Then it just dropped, away. Folded its wings and fell into the cloud cover like a stone. My co-pilot saw it too. We both filed reports, but I don't think anyone believes us. After I hung up, I sat staring at the reports for a long time. 3 experienced pilots, all seeing the same impossible thing. In my experience, when multiple trained observers report the same phenomenon, you take it seriously. That evening, I decided to fly a late patrol over the Cranberry area. If something was up there interfering with commercial aircraft, I needed to know about it. The sun was setting as I lifted off, painting the mountains in deep red and gold. The fog was already starting to form in the valleys, wispy fingers of white creeping between the hills. Perfect conditions for something to hide. I flew north toward the glades, keeping my altitude at about 2,000 feet. The radio was quiet again, that same dead silence I'd noticed that morning. Even my emergency frequency was clear, no static, no background chatter, nothing. That's when I saw the tracks. I was flying over the northern edge of the Cranberry Glades when something in the bog caught my eye. From the air, it looked like someone had pressed giant footprints into the soft ground near the water's edge. But as I circled lower, I realized they weren't footprints. They were landing marks. I set the helicopter down on solid ground about 50 yards away and walked over to investigate. What I found made my blood run cold. The marks were clear in the soft bog soil. 2 deep impressions side by side, each about 2 feet long and shaped like human feet. But extending out from either side were wing impressions, long gouges in the mud where something with enormous wings had touched down. The wingspan, measured from tip to tip, was over 20 feet. I knelt down and examined the foot impressions more closely. They were definitely shaped like human feet, but larger, size 14 or 15 shoes, if someone with feet that big wore shoes. But these weren't boot prints. The impressions showed what looked like toes, long and thin, with marks at the tips that could have been claws. Around the landing site, I found something else that made my hands shake: feathers, dozens of them, scattered in the grass around the bog. But they weren't like any feathers I'd ever seen. They were huge, some of them 18 inches long, and they seemed to shimmer in the dying light. The color shifted from gray to black to deep purple depending on how you looked at them. And they felt wrong somehow. Too light, too soft, like they weren't quite real. I collected several of the feathers and took photos of the landing site. As I was finishing up, the sun disappeared behind the mountains, and the temperature dropped fast. The fog started rolling in thick, cutting my visibility down to just a few yards. That's when I heard it, a sound like nothing I'd ever heard before. Low and rumbling, almost below the range of human hearing. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, vibrating through the ground and up through my boots. The sound got into my chest, into my bones, making my teeth ache. And then, cutting through the fog above me, I saw two red lights. They hovered about 50 feet up, motionless, watching me. As I stared up at them, they moved, slowly, deliberately, like eyes scanning back and forth. The red light was steady, not blinking like aircraft navigation lights. It was more like the glow of hot coals. I fumbled for my radio. "Base, this is Ranger 7. I'm at the Cranberry Glades and I need immediate backup." Static answered me. Then, faintly, I heard my own voice coming back through the radio, delayed by several seconds. "Base, this is Ranger 7. The radio was echoing my own transmission back at me. The red lights moved closer, dropping down through the fog. I could hear the sound of wings now, huge wings beating slowly through the thick air. The subsonic rumble got stronger, making my vision blur. I ran for the helicopter. As I reached the aircraft, I looked back once. Through the fog, I caught a glimpse of something impossible. A figure, human-shaped but wrong, with wings spread wide against the gray sky. The red eyes fixed on me for just a moment, and I felt something touch my mind, cold and ancient and utterly inhuman. Then it was gone, vanishing into the fog like it had never been there at all. I got the helicopter started and lifted off as fast as I could, but as I climbed through the fog bank, my instruments went crazy. The compass spun in circles, the radio erupted in static and that same subsonic rumble, and for a terrifying moment, my engine coughed and nearly died. When I finally broke through the fog and into clear air, everything returned to normal. But I knew that whatever I'd seen down there, it wasn't natural. And it was still out there in the wilderness, watching and waiting. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those red lights staring down at me from the fog. By morning, I'd convinced myself that maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. Stress, low-light conditions, unusual weather. There had to be a rational explanation. Then Susan White Thunder called. Susan was another pilot ranger, worked the territory south of mine. She was Cherokee, like my grandmother, and she'd been flying these mountains for 12 years. Susan was tough, practical, and not given to flights of fancy. So when she called at 6 a.m. with fear in her voice, I knew something was seriously wrong. "Vincent, I need to talk to you, right now. Not over the radio." We met at the Cranberry Visitor Center, a small building on the edge of the wilderness. Susan looked like she hadn't slept either. Her usually neat black hair was messy, and her hands shook as she poured coffee from a thermos. "I saw it," she said, without any introduction. "Last night, around midnight. I was flying back from a medical evacuation down in Pocahontas County when it came up alongside my helicopter. My coffee cup stopped halfway to my mouth. "You saw what?" "You know what? The thing the commercial pilots have been reporting. The thing with wings." Susan described exactly what Captain Torres had told me. A massive winged creature, human-like torso, 20-foot wingspan, glowing red eyes. But her encounter had been different, more intense. "It didn't just pace me," she said. "It played with me. It would drop back, then surge forward. It flew circles around my helicopter, full circles, Vincent. Nothing can maneuver like that, not at those speeds. How fast were you going? 110 miles per hour. It kept up without any effort. Those wings barely moved, like it was gliding through the air on invisible currents. Susan pulled out her flight log and showed me the notes she'd made. For 6 minutes, the creature had stayed with her helicopter. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished into the night. "There's something else," she said. While it was flying with me, my radio picked up something strange. She'd brought a small tape recorder with her. The radio in her helicopter was connected to an automatic recording system required for safety purposes. She played back the tape from her encounter. At first, it was just normal radio chatter and engine noise. Then the background static changed, became deeper, more rhythmic. And underneath it, barely audible, was something that sounded almost like breathing. Slow, deep breathing. "It was breathing on my radio frequency," Susan said. "How does something breathe over radio waves?" We sat in silence for a while, listening to the tape over and over. Each time, that breathing sound seemed more deliberate, more intelligent. "My grandmother used to tell stories," Susan said finally, "about the thunderbird, the great winged spirit that appears before disasters. She said it was neither good nor evil, just necessary. A herald of change. You think this thing is some kind of Indian spirit? I don't know what it is, but I know it's not natural. And I think it's trying to tell us something." Over the next 3 days, the sightings increased. Not just pilots now, but ground crews, hikers, even people in nearby towns. The descriptions were always the same. Enormous winged creature, human-like body, glowing red eyes. Carl Brennan called me again. The FAA was getting nervous. They'd issued a notice to airmen, TOW, a NOTAM, advising aircraft to avoid the Cranberry Wilderness area below 10,000 feet. The commercial airlines were rerouting flights around the entire region. "This is costing the airlines thousands of dollars a day," Carl said. "I need answers, Vincent. What the hell is up there?" I wish I could have told him, but the truth was, I didn't know either. All I knew was that, whatever it was getting bolder. On September 20th, I flew another patrol over the glades. This time, I brought a camera with a telephoto lens and a backup radio. I also carried something else, an old hunting rifle that had belonged to my father. I didn't know if bullets would stop something like this, but it made me feel better to have it along. The weather was clear, perfect flying conditions. No fog, good visibility, light winds. As I approached the glades, I could see them clearly spread out below me like a green carpet. They were still empty. No birds, no animals. The silence was complete. I was taking photographs of the area where I'd found the landing marks when my backup radio crackled to life. Not with voice traffic, but with that same subsonic rumble I'd heard before. The sound seemed to pulse in rhythm with something, a heartbeat maybe, or breathing. Then I saw it. It rose up out of the trees east of the glades like something from a nightmare. In full daylight, with no fog to hide behind, I got my first clear look at the creature. It was everything the pilots had described, and worse. 7 feet tall, with a human torso covered in dark gray skin. The arms were long and thin, ending in hands with fingers that looked more like claws. But the most horrible thing was the wings. They were like a moth's wings, but enormous. 20 feet from tip to tip, covered in scales that shifted color in the sunlight. The wings moved slowly, gracefully, keeping the creature aloft without any apparent effort. And the eyes, even from a distance of 200 yards, those red eyes seemed to look right through me. They weren't just red, they pulsed with their own light, like 2 beating hearts made of fire. The creature flew directly toward my helicopter. I tried to climb, to get away from it, but it matched my every move. When I banked left, it banked left. When I tried to dive, it followed. It was playing with me, just like it had played with Susan. For 5 minutes, it stayed with me, flying just off my right side. I could see every detail of its impossible anatomy. The skin wasn't quite skin. It had a texture like leather, but it seemed to shift and move on its own. The face was vaguely human, but elongated, with a mouth that never opened. I managed to take several photographs, though my hands were shaking so badly I wasn't sure they'd come out clear. Then, suddenly, it was gone. Not flying away, just gone. 1 second, it was there beside me, the next second, empty air. like it had simply ceased to exist. I flew back to the station as fast as my helicopter would carry me, but when I developed the photographs that afternoon, they showed nothing but empty sky. Whatever that thing was, it didn't show up on film. That night, I called Susan and Carl, told them what I'd seen. Susan believed me immediately. Carl was harder to convince, but the evidence was mounting. Too many reliable witnesses, too. Many similar reports. We need to set up some kind of organized observation, Carl said. If this thing is real, we need to document it properly. We made plans to meet the next morning at the ranger station. Carl would bring official FAA recording equipment. Susan would provide backup air support, and I would guide them to the areas where the creature had been sighted. But the creature had other plans. That night, it came to me. I was asleep in my cabin near the station when something woke me, a sound like huge wings beating against the wind. I looked out my bedroom window and saw it perched on the roof of the ranger station, not 50 yards away. It sat there like some enormous gargoyle, wings folded against its back, head turned toward my cabin. Those red eyes burned in the darkness, unblinking, patient. We stared at each other for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Then it spread its wings and launched itself into the night sky, disappearing over the mountains. But before it left, something happened that I'll never forget. Just for a moment, I felt its thoughts touch mine. Not words, not language, but pure meaning flowing directly into my consciousness. It was trying to warn me about something. Something terrible was coming, and it was my job to listen. The next morning brought the worst fog I'd ever seen in the mountains. Thick, gray, and cold, it rolled down from the high peaks like a living thing. Visibility was down to less than 50 feet, and the temperature had dropped 20 degrees overnight. Carl arrived from Charleston with a van full of equipment, electromagnetic sensors, infrared cameras, digital recording devices, and radar units sensitive enough to track a bird at 2 miles. Susan flew in from the south, barely making it through the fog to land at our small airstrip. "I don't like this weather," she said as we loaded the equipment into my helicopter. "My grandmother always said that when the Mulder spirits walk, the earth hides its face." Carl was more practical. "The fog will actually help us. If this creature is real, the infrared cameras will pick it up even in zero visibility." We took off at noon, flying in formation, my helicopter with Carl and his equipment, Susan flying back up in her aircraft. The plan was simple: patrol the Cranberry Glades area and wait for the creature to show itself. We didn't have to wait long. 20 minutes into the patrol, Carl's electromagnetic sensors went crazy. The needles jumped across the scales, and static filled our headsets. Through the fog, we began to hear that familiar subsonic rumble. "It's here," Carl said, adjusting his instruments. "The electromagnetic signature is off the charts. Whatever this thing is, it's generating enough energy to power a small town." Susan's voice crackled over the radio. "I've got movement on infrared. Something big, flying parallel to us about 200 yards north." I turned the rattle-ass helicopter toward the contact, but flying in that fog was like moving through a gray wool blanket. The world outside the cockpit disappeared completely, leaving us suspended in a featureless void. Then the rumbling stopped. "I've lost the contact," Susan reported. It was there, then it just vanished. Carl's sensors were still showing massive electromagnetic activity, but now it seemed to be coming from all around us. "This is impossible," he muttered. "The readings suggest we're surrounded by the source." That's when my engine started to sputter. "Mayday, mayday," I radioed. "Ranger 7 experiencing engine failure. I'm going down." Through the fog, I could barely make out the dark shape of the forest rushing up toward us. I managed to auto-rotate the helicopter into a small clearing just south of the glades, but the landing was hard. Carl's equipment cases burst open on impact, scattering expensive instruments across the cabin floor. We climbed out of the wrecked helicopter, shaken but unhurt. The fog was so thick we could barely see each other, even standing a few feet apart. "Susan, do you copy?" I called on my handheld radio. Static answered me, then her voice, distorted and faint. "Vincent, something's wrong with my instruments. I can't see anything, and my compass is spinning like a top. I'm setting down." We heard the sound of her helicopter landing somewhere nearby, but in the fog, she might as well have been on the moon. Then the fog began to glow. At first, It was just a faint red light filtering through the mist. But as we watched, the glow grew stronger, pulsing rhythmically like a slow heartbeat. The light seemed to come from above us, casting everything in an eerie crimson shade. "Jesus Christ," Carl whispered. "Look at this." He was staring at one of his instruments that had survived the crash, a magnetometer that measured electromagnetic fields. The display showed a pattern unlike anything in his 25 years of experience. Instead of random spikes and valleys, the electromagnetic energy was organized, structured, almost like, "It's a heartbeat," he said. The electromagnetic pulses matched the rhythm of a human heartbeat, but amplified 1,000 times. The red glow grew brighter, and through the fog, we began to see a shape descending toward us. Huge wings moving in slow, deliberate strokes, a humanoid figure suspended beneath them like some impossible angel. It landed in the clearing not 20 feet from where we stood. Up close, the creature was even more terrifying than I'd imagined. 7 feet tall, with skin that looked like wet leather, it stood perfectly still, watching us with those burning red eyes. The wings folded against its back with a sound like rustling silk, but they never quite disappeared. They seemed to phase in and out of visibility, like they existed in more than one dimension. Carl raised one of his cameras, but the creature turned, its head toward him, and the device simply died in his hands. All the lights went out, and he dropped it to the ground. "Don't move," I whispered. "I don't think it wants to hurt us." For several minutes, we stood there in that strange red twilight, staring at each other across 20 feet of misty air. The creature's eyes never blinked, never looked away. It was studying us, learning from us. Then it began to move. Not toward us, but in a slow circle around the clearing. With each step, images flashed through my mind, not my own thoughts, but visions forced into my consciousness by the creature itself. I saw the Buffalo Creek Dam, 40 miles south of where we stood. In my vision, the earthen dam wall was cracking, water seeping through in a dozen places. I saw the valley below, filled with families in small towns who had no idea their lives were about to end. The visions came faster now. I saw the dam bursting, a wall of black water 30 feet high roaring down. The valley. I saw houses swept away like toys, people running for their lives, entire communities destroyed in minutes. And through it all, I understood what the creature was trying to tell me. The disaster was coming. Soon. Within days, maybe hours. And somehow, it was my responsibility to prevent it. "The dam," I gasped, turning to Carl. "The Buffalo Creek Dam is going to fail." Carl stared at me. "How can you possibly know that?" Before I could answer, the creature spread its wings and launched itself back into the fog. But as it disappeared, one final image burned into my mind. A clock face showing 3:47 and a calendar page showing October 2nd. 12 days from now. Susan's voice crackled over the radio. "Vincent, where are you? I can see lights moving through the fog." "Stay where you are," I called back. "We're coming to you." As we gathered our remaining equipment and stumbled through the fog towards Susan's helicopter, Carl grabbed my arm. "Vincent, you can't possibly know about any dam failure. There are no reports of structural problems at Buffalo Creek." But I did know. The creature had shown me exactly what was going to happen and when. The only question was whether anyone would believe me in time to do something about it. It took us 3 hours to hike through the fog to where Susan had set down her helicopter. By the time we reached her, the mist was beginning to clear, and we could see the mountains again. Susan took one look at our faces and knew something had changed. "You saw it, didn't you?" she said. "You saw the Thunderbird." I told her about the visions, about the dam, about the date and time burned into my memory. Susan nodded, as if she'd been expecting exactly this. "My grandmother told me that when the spirits choose someone to receive their warnings, that person becomes responsible for acting on them. The question is, what are you going to do?" Carl was more skeptical. "Vincent, you can't call in a disaster warning based on hallucinations. The FAA doesn't work that way." But I wasn't talking about the FAA anymore. Over the next week, I made phone calls. I contacted the Army Corps of Engineers, the State Emergency Management Office, local newspapers, anyone who would listen. I told them I had information about potential structural problems at the Buffalo Creek Dam. Most of them thought I was crazy. A few agreed to look into it, The Corps of Engineers sent a team to inspect the dam, but their initial report found no immediate problems. On September 30th, 2 days before the date in my vision, I drove down to Buffalo Creek myself. I couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. The dam looked solid enough, a massive earthen structure holding back millions of gallons of water. But when I talked to the engineers working there, I learned something interesting. They'd been having problems with seepage for months. Small leaks, nothing that seemed dangerous, but the situation was getting worse. "We've got it under control," the chief engineer told me. "But if we get any significant rainfall in the next few weeks, we might have to lower the water level as a precaution." That night, it started to rain. Not just rain, a torrential downpour that continued for 18 hours straight. The kind of rain that turns small creeks into rivers and rivers into floods. By the morning of October 2nd, the Buffalo Creek Dam was holding back more water than it had ever been designed to contain. I was in my truck, parked on a hill overlooking the dam, when my watch showed 3:47 p.m. The failure started exactly as I'd seen it in my vision. A small crack appeared in the earthen wall, then water began seeping through in increasing amounts. Within minutes, the seepage became a torrent, and the entire dam structure began to collapse. But this time, the valley below wasn't full of unsuspecting families. My calls had worked, not the official warnings. Those had been largely ignored. But I'd also contacted local churches, community groups, anyone with influence in the small towns below the dam. Some of them had taken my warnings seriously enough to organize unofficial evacuations. When the dam burst, sending 30 feet of black water roaring down the valley, most of the people were already gone. 14 people died that day instead of the hundreds I'd seen in my visions. 14 lives lost because some folks hadn't believed the warnings, but hundreds saved because others had. The official investigation blamed the disaster on unusual rainfall and poor maintenance. They never found any evidence of supernatural intervention. Carl kept quiet about what we'd seen in the fog, and the FAA closed their file on the Cranberry Wilderness sightings as unexplained aerial phenomena. But I knew the truth. The creature, whatever it was, had shown me the future to give people a chance to change it. It wasn't evil or good in any human sense. It was just necessary, a herald of disasters, appearing to warn those who would listen. Over the years that followed, I continued to patrol the Cranberry Wilderness. I saw the creature 3 more times, always before some kind of disaster. A mine collapse in 1978, a bridge failure in 1981, a chemical plant explosion in 1984. Each time, the visions were clearer, more detailed. And each time, I was able to save lives by passing along warnings. People started calling me the Prophet Ranger, though they never understood where my information came from. The Forest Service thought I was just unusually good at reading weather patterns and structural problems. They promoted me twice and used me as an example of dedication to public safety. Only Susan understood the truth. She'd started having her own encounters with the creature, her own visions. Together, we developed an informal network of people who'd had similar experiences. Pilots, rangers, hikers who'd seen the red lights in the mountains and lived to tell about it. We called ourselves the Watchers, and our job was simple: listen to the warnings and try to save lives. The Mothman of Cranberry Wilderness is still out there. I retired from the Forest Service 5 years ago, but I still live in these mountains, still watch the skies. Sometimes, on foggy nights when the air feels heavy with electricity, I see those red lights moving through the darkness. And when I do, I know that somewhere, somehow, disaster is coming. But I also know that someone has been chosen to receive the warning. The spirits don't choose just anyone to carry their messages. It's a burden and a privilege that changes you forever. Once you've looked into those burning red eyes and felt that ancient intelligence touch your mind, you're never quite the same. But you're also never quite alone. Because somewhere out there in the mountains, the Mothman is watching, waiting for the next disaster to reveal itself. And when it does, he'll find someone to carry the warning. Someone like me. Someone like Susan. Someone who understands that some responsibilities are bigger than our own fear. The spirits walk among us still. And they're trying to help, if we're brave enough to listen,